what's a good way for us to think about the future? Futurists use a pretty interesting tool and technique called the cone of possibilities. So imagine for a minute that you're peering through the narrow end of a cone. And as you look out into the cone, it gets broader and broader. And also imagine as you peer out farther into the cone, the distance increases. So the narrow end of the cone represents things that are happening now, or in the present, or things that might even be a couple months, even maybe a year out. And as you look farther into the cone, the time increases, the distance increases, so you're looking out 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, as far out as you can imagine. And as you peer out into the cone obviously becomes wider. But as the cone gets broader, all of a sudden you have more possibilities that can emerge, more scenarios that are possible. And futurists use a couple different ways to think in terms of those scenarios. So the first scenario that you can try to come up with is what you would like to happen. So the ideal scenario for you. The other possible scenario that might come up is what might happen. Another scenario could be what do you think will happen, but it's not likely to happen. And so you can play around with those three different scenarios. So let's take, for example, the case of artificial intelligence and jobs. Now, the ideal scenario of what I would like to happen is that technology will be used to augment humans, new jobs will be created, and everything will be fine and wonderful. What do I think is likely going to happen? Well, I think there will be some job displacement. I think some new jobs will be created, but I think there's going to be a little bit of an imbalance between jobs that are created and jobs that are eliminated. I think there's going to be a little bit of chaos. Some companies will augment jobs and other companies will really focus on replacing jobs. Now, what can happen but is perhaps not likely? In my scenario, that might be technology takes over everything. And then we're all just kind of walking around with shotguns and pitchforks like we are in The Walking Dead. And so if you think in terms of those scenarios, it will help you plan and anticipate for what the future might bring. A lot of people think that futurists predict the future, but the reality is that what futurists do is they help us not be surprised by what the future might bring. And so I want to encourage you to think a little bit like a futurist. Think in terms of scenarios and possibilities. And once you define and outline those scenarios, you can work backwards to see what steps you need to take to create your ideal scenario or to prepare for other scenarios that might emerge. So think like a futurist.